They came in ships the size of mountains, hovering above Earth's orbit like Judgment Day had been penciled into the calendar. The sky was littered with shadows, and the sun no longer shined the same. At first, everyone thought it was another asteroid scare or a weird satellite glitch. Then came the broadcast. The face of the lead diplomat wasn't something people could easily forget. Pale blue skin, eyes black and deep like oceans with no bottom, and a voice that didn't need to scream, it simply was, vibrating through the minds of every human tuned in. No translation needed. No delay. Just clarity and threat. "Humans of Earth," the voice said, slow and confident. "Your time as an independent species has expired. We offer you mercy. Surrender peacefully. Serve the Council. Be preserved. Or resist and be erased." The world went quiet. No one laughed. No one joked. This wasn't some alien movie playing on late-night TV. This was real. And Earth wasn't ready. Well, not completely. In an underground bunker somewhere beneath the Rockies, a group of individuals sat around a cold steel table. Some wore military uniforms, others lab coats, others civilian clothes that looked worn and sleepless. They weren't leaders by rank, they were leaders by necessity. The world governments had fractured too quickly. Panic had done more damage than the arrival of the ships. One man at the table, a former mechanic turned tactical engineer, cleared his throat. We all heard the message. They're not asking, they're telling. And I don't care what kind of tech they have. I'm not bowing to anything with tentacles and a superiority complex. An older woman, gray streaks running through her braids, gave him a sharp look. They'll level cities just to make a point. We're not ready, not even close. But we've got something they don't. Someone else chimed in, a software hacker who'd once brought down a government database just to prove it was vulnerable. We've got rage, we've got fear, we've got crazy, and when you combine all three, that's how you make war. They called themselves the Backbone, a ragtag alliance of scientists, soldiers, rogue leaders, underground groups, and the kind of people who didn't need medals to know they mattered. And right there, in that cold bunker, they made a choice. Earth wouldn't surrender. Earth would fight. And if this was humanity's last breath, it would be one hell of a scream. The first retaliation wasn't loud. It was invisible. While the alien ships loomed above, the Backbone launched something far more dangerous than missiles. They sent a virus. Not the kind that makes you sneeze. The kind that slips through firewalls, talks in code, and whispers lies into alien systems. It didn't aim to destroy, it aimed to confuse, to delay, to test the enemy's reaction. The response came in hours. A city in Eastern Europe was turned to ash. No warning, no words, just a beam from the sky and a crater that used to hold 1 million lives. That was the last day Earth stood still. Underground factories roared back to life. Submarines were reprogrammed. Satellites were hijacked. Nations, for once, didn't argue, they adapted. The Backbone became Earth's brain. The angry, desperate billions became its muscle. The message was clear now. The aliens came to enslave a species, but what they found was a species that refused to kneel. 3 days after the first city turned to glass, a new plan went into motion. No one slept anymore. Sleep had become a luxury Earth couldn't afford. Cities that had survived the first orbital blasts went dark, their lights cut off to avoid being targeted. Civilization, as the aliens understood it, was unraveling. But humanity wasn't dying, it was transforming. In the bunkers, the labs, the back rooms of abandoned supermarkets and train stations, minds worked faster than machines. The Backbone was no longer a secret, it had become the unofficial command center of the resistance. They didn't run things the way governments used to. There was no voting, no bureaucracy. If you had a skill, you used it. If you had strength, you were given a mission. And if you had neither, you were taught to dig, patch wounds, or make bullets. Humans didn't need hope. They needed purpose. The virus sent to the alien systems had done more than cause confusion. It had revealed something: the aliens weren't flawless. Their systems though powerful, relied on centralized command. They weren't used to decentralized chaos. They were built for dominance, not disruption, and Earth was full of disruption. Still, the enemy was adapting. Fast. The ships above Earth weren't just war machines, they were living hubs of biomechanical intelligence, each controlled by a cerebral caste of the alien species that called themselves the Velari Ascendancy. They believed in purity of control, order through hierarchy, and that the galaxy belonged to those who could impose structure on chaos. And they saw humans as the very definition of chaos. Inside the lead Velari flagship, high above Earth's stratosphere, the central diplomat stood in silence. His long, fluid limbs were wrapped in shimmering layers of neural silk. His eyes closed as he processed streams of data from across the planet. He had seen resistance before, of course. Many species struggled before falling. But something about humans was different. They didn't just resist, they learned while resisting, adapted mid-battle, changed tactics before battles even began. This species, one of his sub-commanders transmitted, is primitive, yet functions like a neural storm. The more pressure we apply, the more unpredictable they become. They are diseased with independence, the diplomat responded. We will cleanse it, but deep down, even he felt it a flicker of uncertainty. It was small, but it existed. That made it dangerous. Back on Earth, the Backbone launched its next move. They called it Project Spite. Humanity had only one advantage left: desperation. And with it came invention. Project Spite was a collection of insane, last-ditch technologies designed in record time by people who'd never have been taken seriously in any world that wasn't collapsing. There was no time for ethics boards, field testing, or safety protocols. If it exploded, melted, or fried the operator but still worked, it was greenlit. Some of the weapons were simple. A railgun built from the scrap of downed satellites, acid bombs made from industrial waste, hacked drones turned into aerial mines. Others were uglier. One lab in what used to be northern Canada developed frequency disruptors, devices that emitted piercing, high-spectrum sonic blasts aimed at destabilizing alien neuronets. They tested them first on captured Velari scouts. The results were horrifying and effective. The creatures screamed not with their mouths, but with their minds. Blood vessels ruptured from within, some liquefied from the inside out. The woman who led that project, a former sound engineer, simply nodded. I know what pain sounds like now, she said, and I know how to make it, but weapons weren't enough. The Velari had numbers, thousands of ships, millions of soldiers, and they had gravity-manipulating tech that could turn a mountain into sand from orbit. The Backbone knew this, so they went underground, literally. Entire cities were rebuilt below the surface. Metro systems turned into barracks, sewers turned into communication tunnels, subways re-engineered into launch bays. And the surface? That was left for the dead, filled with ruins, booby traps, false signals, and drones that mimicked life to mislead alien sensors. By the end of the second week, humanity had vanished from the eyes of the Velari. But they hadn't disappeared, they were just waiting to strike. And they did. The first counteroffensive took place in what used to be Brazil. One of the Velari terraforming units, machines the size of oil rigs, had landed in the jungle to begin converting oxygen-rich atmosphere into something more efficient for their physiology. They didn't expect jungle warfare. The rainforest became a death maze. The Velari troops, tall and slender with exoskeletal armor and plasma blades, moved with precision, but they weren't ready for trees rigged to explode, for venomous creatures hurled at them by silent guerrillas, or for swarms of fire ants weaponized by pheromone bombs. One human name unknown. No rank ran into the middle of a Velari patrol wearing nothing but mud and a smile. He held a backpack of thermite grenades and whispered something in English before pulling every pin. The transmission from the unit went dark after that. By the end of the operation, the terraforming rig was in flames, and every Velari in the area had either fled or been dragged into the trees, never to be seen again. The aliens learned a new word that day: trap, and another: Revenge. Still, victory was never clean. For every successful hit, humans lost hundreds. Supplies ran thin. Water had to be filtered by hand. Injuries went untreated, and the psychological toll was worse. Children didn't cry anymore. Adults didn't laugh. Everyone aged faster. Some just broke, mentally snapped, disappeared into the wasteland, or turned suicidal in the tunnels. But others became something else, something harder than steel. People with no past, no hesitation, only mission. They became ghosts, shadows, executioners of Earth's vengeance. The Valari called them surface phantoms. They struck at night, without sound. Cut power lines to alien tanks, slipped into outposts, and slit throats with melted metal. One alien commander was found nailed to the hull of his own dropship, with a note written in blood. "You should have come in peace." By week 4, the Valari realized something horrifying. They weren't fighting a species, they were fighting an idea. And you can't conquer an idea. The Galactic Council overseeing the invasion began to get nervous. What should have been a clean absorption of an inferior planet had turned into a messy, costly, morale-shattering quagmire. Broadcasts meant to demoralize Earth instead became memes in underground networks. One of the more infamous ones showed the Valari diplomat giving his surrender ultimatum, edited to have clown makeup and subtitles that read, "We underestimated the naked apes. Earth was laughing again." Not because things were better, but because laughing in the face of doom was the only thing keeping people sane. Then came the turning point. A Valari ship was captured. Not shot down, captured. It had landed in Siberia to establish a forward base. But their systems were compromised by human-made micro-drones the size of insects. These drones snuck aboard during refueling, infected the life support system, and triggered a series of internal malfunctions. Half the crew died from rapid decompression, the other half from carbon dioxide poisoning when their filters shut down. When the backbone operatives entered the ship, they found one Valari still alive, gasping on the floor, claws twitching. He looked up, confused, blood pooling from his nose. One of the humans, a former linguist turned interrogator, knelt beside him and whispered, "You invaded the wrong species." Then they took the ship. Piece by piece, they studied it, reverse-engineered its controls, learned its patterns. The engineers were starving, sleep-deprived, and desperate, but in 10 days, they did what most thought impossible. They flew it. The first human-piloted alien ship broke through the clouds like a phoenix. When Valari sensors detected it, they assumed it was one of theirs until it got too close to a command cruiser and unleashed everything it had. Missiles, lasers, EMP pulses, and at the end, the ship's self-destruct. The command cruiser was vaporized, and humans sent out a signal across the galaxy. "We're learning. Fast." The Valari's message had been clear. Surrender or be erased. But humanity didn't erase easily. They smeared, they stained, they left scars, and now those scars were showing. From the deserts of the old Middle East to the flooded ruins of coastal cities, a new kind of war was being written, one not based on fleets and numbers, but improvisation, rage, and evolution. Earth was a mess. But it was our mess, and we would die defending it. Except, now, dying didn't seem like the only option anymore. Now, humanity had something it hadn't had since the first blast hit Eastern Europe: leverage. The Valari Council met in silence aboard a command station drifting above the moons of Jupiter, far from Earth's skies and the burning carcasses of their ruined cruisers. The chamber pulsed with ambient blue light, breathing with the rhythm of a living thing. The Council didn't need to speak. Their thoughts were transmitted through a shared neural field. For a species built on rigid logic and hierarchy, this silence wasn't peace. It was tension. It was failure. The lead ambassador broke the quiet first. "This infestation must be purged. The humans have violated galactic protocol. They should not possess our ships. They should not be alive," a younger diplomat interjected, his tone sharper. "They adapt too quickly. We underestimated the plasticity of their psychology. Their aggression isn't biological, it's cultural. They choose to fight in madness. They find glory in suffering. They celebrate defiance. Then we remove their reasons to celebrate, another counselor replied. We burn the rest of their cities, starve them, silence their networks. If they speak through chaos, we will return silence. But deep down, they all knew the truth. Humanity wasn't just fighting for survival anymore. They were enjoying the war. In the bunker below what used to be Denver, the Backbone leadership was watching a transmission. Not one of the Velaris, this one was homemade, patched together by resistance fighters in a lab dug beneath a school gymnasium. The video showed the captured Velari cruiser being torn apart piece by piece, wires, energy cores, navigation systems, all repurposed. Human scientists stood beside chalkboards and plasma screens, pointing out discoveries, laughing like mad inventors. One even toasted the camera with a cup of dirty water. At the end of the video, someone stepped into frame, not a soldier, not a general, just a teenage girl in a patched-up jacket, holding a handmade rifle. "We don't care who you are," she said, staring dead into the lens. "You came here thinking we'd break, but Earth doesn't break. We don't fold. We flip the table. You wanted surrender? You got resistance. You wanted silence? You got a war song." That clip went viral. And not just across Earth's scattered bunkers and labs, but across the Galactic network, because humans had found a way to hijack it. Velari communication streams, once considered unbreachable, had been infiltrated by Earth-based tech. Not to destroy them, but to embarrass them. The messages were short, often less than a minute, but they were brutal. One video showed a Velari patrol ambushed in a sewer, their armor splattered with a corrosive compound that ate through their skin. The footage zoomed in on graffiti scrawled in blood beside the corpses. "Better luck next time." Another showed human children in gas masks flipping off a passing scout drone. Each broadcast ended the same way with the words, "We are Earth. Come get us." Project Spite was evolving too. In a hidden complex inside what was once a hydroelectric plant, engineers were working around the clock on Project Black Echo, a sound-based psychological weapon meant to trigger panic and hallucinations in Velari soldiers. It wasn't about killing, it was about breaking minds. They tested it on a group of captured Velari units kept in sensory deprivation chambers. The moment the frequency was activated, the aliens thrashed like animals. Their neural nets scrambled. Some collapsed instantly. Others begged for mercy in broken languages, scratching at their own flesh. The lead scientist, a woman who once taught music theory, adjusted her headset and whispered, "Told you rhythm could kill." Meanwhile, underground bunkers were being upgraded. What had once been survival shelters were now fortresses, each rigged with false tunnels, rotating rooms, and escape chutes. Human engineers learned to make entire structures vanish behind holographic rock walls or beneath pools of water. The Velari scanned for life and found none. But Earth was never silent. In the shadows, a new kind of soldier was being trained. Not with rank or medals. These weren't clean-cut warriors or parade-marching troops. These were the breach teams, 6-person cells trained to infiltrate Velari ships, sabotage reactors, and vanish before alarms were raised. They studied alien anatomy, practiced Velari speech patterns, wore stolen armor and masks. One team even managed to sneak aboard a mid-orbit refueling station, disguised as maintenance drones, and planted explosives in the station's core. The result? A chain reaction that vaporized 3 warships. The Velari were enraged, but anger didn't make them stronger. It made them sloppier. They began launching blind retaliations, blasting entire mountain ranges just in case a signal came from nearby. Cities with no survivors were bombed again. The aliens weren't just fighting Earth now, they were fighting their own fear. And that fear had a name: humans. In a rain-soaked jungle in Southeast Asia, one of the Velari's newest ground battalions made landfall. Sleek, armored units, bipedal walkers, drones hovering above like metal vultures. The jungle was marked for complete sterilization, but the trees watched, and beneath the roots, the earth waited. The Velari moved through the dense undergrowth, scanners blaring, heat signatures picking up ghost traces of movement. Their path led to what looked like an abandoned village. Empty huts, rusted metal. A single flag waving in the wind, the old Earth insignia, dirt-stained and torn. The commander issued the order. Purge. But the moment their troops stepped into the village square, the ground exploded. Hundreds of pressure mines, all handmade, all covered with thermal dampeners, went off at once. Half the battalion evaporated in a wave of shrapnel and fire. The rest fell back only to find the path behind them rigged with spikes, nets, and neurotoxic gas. Hidden in the trees, human snipers fired homemade rifles powered by alien energy cells. One by one, the remaining Valari dropped. A final message was left burned into the side of a tree. Still think we're primitive? High above Earth, the Valari fleet's leadership was unraveling. Morale was at its lowest. Ships that had once conquered planets were now locked down in orbit, terrified to land. Supply lines were compromised. Communication was being disrupted by human jamming fields. One captain even turned his ship around, refusing to deploy ground troops until the threat was properly sterilized. The council began fracturing. One faction demanded full planetary annihilation to fire their singularity cores and burn Earth from orbit. Consequences be damned. Another faction warned that such a move would violate interstellar law and provoke the other species in the Galactic Council. Humanity must be contained, not martyred, one Valari noble warned. If we make them into victims, they will become legends. They already are, someone else replied. Back on Earth, the Resistance had found a strange kind of rhythm. Every death fueled more vengeance. Every defeat sparked more innovation. And now, they had alien tech, fully functional, reverse-engineered, and weaponized. In a salt mine-turned-weapons lab, Earth's first hybrid mech was built powered by Valari plasma cores, armored with salvaged cruiser plating, and piloted by a woman who used to race motorcycles across the Nevada desert. It wasn't elegant. It wasn't sleek. It was loud, ugly, and mean. They named it Mud Devil. The first time it was deployed, it tore through a Valari firebase in minutes. Plasma cannons burned craters in enemy lines. Missile pods fired in chaotic, unpredictable bursts, patterns designed to mimic human rage, not precision. The aliens didn't understand it, because war, to them, was supposed to be choreographed. To humans, war was jazz, improvised, emotional, chaotic, and deadly. The backbone received new intelligence. Valari reinforcements were on their way. The fleet above Earth wasn't the full force. Worse, they weren't even the main force. The aliens were regrouping, planning something bigger, worse, possibly final. But humans didn't plan for defeat. They planned for revenge. A secret program, Project Hollow Sky, was initiated. Its goal wasn't survival. It was escalation. The scientists working on it were some of the best minds Earth had left. And the craziest. A quantum physicist who used to build nukes. A cyberneticist who lost her brother in the first attack. A former criminal who could build EMP bombs out of kitchen appliances. Together, they developed a prototype. A neural wave cannon that could be fired from a satellite. The idea was simple. Scramble the neural patterns of any species tuned to Valari frequencies. The results wouldn't be pretty, and they didn't care. But first, they needed a satellite in orbit. And they needed someone insane enough to fly it there. A name surfaced. A smuggler. A pilot. Someone who used to run supplies through meteor storms and black market routes. No one knew her real name. Everyone called her Rat. She showed up chewing on a matchstick, wearing sunglasses underground, and said, "I'll do it for free. I just want to watch those blue bastards scream." When asked how she planned to survive re-entry after firing the cannon, she just grinned. Who said I planned to come back? The plan was underway. The cannon was loaded onto a makeshift launch rig, retrofitted from an old rocket base. Rat climbed into the cockpit, glanced at the cracked photo of her dog taped to the console, and said, "Let's make history, boys." The launch roared through the night. The sky lit up, and above the clouds, the The Valari ships turned to see a human missile rise toward the stars, not to run, but to bring war to the very edge of the galaxy. The stars were silent when the cannon fired. Up in low orbit, wrapped inside a stolen Valari satellite shell, the neural wave weapon activated without warning. No light, no sound, just a ripple, invisible and instant, that spread across the sky like a quiet scream. The cannon had no official name. It wasn't christened by generals or branded by marketing teams. But down on Earth, they started calling it Skyburn, because that's what happened to the Valari. Dozens of warships began losing control, not exploding, not malfunctioning, forgetting. Their pilots collapsed mid-command. Crew members clutched their heads and shrieked in frequencies that scrambled their own comms. A cruiser hovering over the Pacific just dropped, not as an act of destruction, but as if it had simply forgotten how to fly. When it hit the water, a mushroom of steam shot miles into the sky. Then came the silence. The humans watching from below didn't cheer. They didn't celebrate. They studied. They needed to know what worked and how long it would keep working. Because if Earth had learned one thing, it was this. The Valari were fast learners. But humans were faster liars. The Valari command didn't understand it at first. They assumed it was a new form of psychic warfare or internal sabotage. Some suspected mutiny, others heresy. But as ship after ship reported blackouts, seizures, and system collapse, the truth became harder to ignore. The humans had sent something into orbit, and it was killing from the inside out. Emergency protocols were triggered. Communications across the orbital fleet were shut down for 72 hours to prevent further contamination. The Valari encrypted all remaining messages with a fresh neural key, one that humans wouldn't possibly decode. They were wrong. Within 18 hours, the new key was cracked. Why? Because humans weren't guessing anymore. They were learning in real time, building AI systems not designed for perfection, but for imitation. Programs that thought like the enemy, that dreamed like the enemy, until they could open any system like a rusted lock. The Valari called it an abomination. Humans called it Plan B. Somewhere deep in what used to be the Mojave Desert, a new underground base had gone operational. It wasn't a bunker. It wasn't a lab. It was a launch hive. Here, humanity's first hybrid craft were being assembled, not fighter jets, but orbit breakers. Ugly, asymmetrical ships patched together from Earth metals and Valari fragments, held together with sweat, spite, and welding torches. They were too slow to dogfight and too fragile to face cruisers head-on, but they didn't need to. Their only purpose was to get up and take the war to space. The first launch was silent. No global broadcasts, no victory speech, just a coded message sent to every surviving resistance cell. We are no longer ground-bound. The ship was piloted by a squad of nobodies. A former delivery driver, an out-of-work chemist, a nurse who hadn't slept in 4 days, and a blind radio operator who could sense radiation like breath. They weren't soldiers. They weren't trained, but they made it to orbit. And once they did something no one expected. They boarded a Valari ship alive. The boarding was chaos. The Valari didn't anticipate humans in their own domain. They hadn't even reinforced the outer hulls for internal assault. So, when the resistance team breached a side hatch using an electromagnetic spike drill, they entered the ship like termites chewing through steel. They didn't come to destroy. They came to download. The nurse rigged a relay to the central memory node. The chemist began cataloging samples from the ship's atmosphere. The delivery driver, now turned makeshift gunner, kept watch while holding a plasma rifle he could barely aim. They were in and out in 14 minutes. By the time Valari security bots arrived, the humans were gone, dragging hard drives, biosamples, and stolen weapons into the void. They didn't make it back. Their ship was destroyed during re-entry, but the data survived. It crashed into the Arizona desert in a fireball and was recovered by a scavenger crew 3 days later. Most of the files were damaged, but the parts that worked changed everything. They revealed something the Valari had never wanted known. They weren't gods. They weren't even unified. The Valari Empire was built on appearances. A single voice, a singular vision. But behind closed frequencies, there were fractures, deep political rifts between factions of the Empire. Some wanted Earth cleansed. Others wanted it studied. Still others feared the attention humanity was drawing from other galactic species that had long stayed silent in the shadows. The data showed arguments, protests, even sabotage. One line in a corrupted audio file became famous in resistance channels. "We cannot afford to create another Solari crisis. These humans are not prey. They are ignition." No one knew what the Solari crisis was. But the implications were clear. Earth wasn't just surviving the invasion. It was destabilizing the invaders. Back at the Mojave launch hive, Project Golem was entering final testing. Unlike previous designs, this ship was meant to fight. A two-pilot attack vessel, fitted with hybrid thrusters and loaded with sound-based weapons designed to scramble Velari neural armor. Its armor was salvaged from downed drones. Its interface was mostly duct tape and repurposed VR equipment. But it could turn on a dime and fire while doing it. The test pilots were twins, street racers from Detroit, raised on war and junkyards. They had spent more time in stolen cars than classrooms, and that made them perfect. They didn't think like pilots. They thought like survivors. When Golem launched, it didn't fly straight. It drifted, skidded, spun, twisted in zero-G like a shark learning to swim. When it engaged its first target, a Scout-class Velari vessel, it didn't aim for center mass. It aimed for the joints, the antenna, the exposed belly. 3 shots, 1 kill. Meanwhile, far from Earth, something else was happening. Other species were watching, and they were curious. Humanity had always been considered a backwater civilization, unrefined, loud, petty. But now, that pettiness was turning into something cosmic, something contagious. A few small, unaffiliated ships belonging to neutral races began orbiting Earth just outside Velari range. Observing, documenting, sending probes. The Velari ordered them to leave. Some did, one didn't. It was a cloaked vessel from a species called the Naruan, thought extinct. When the Velari fired on it, the Naruan responded not with violence but with a message. Translated into human language, it read, "We have no love for your species, but we admire your defiance. Keep fighting." It was the first time Earth received outside acknowledgement. The Resistance printed it on T-shirts. Project Skyburn was recharged and ready, but this time, it had a second payload, a message. Not a human message, a Velari message, pieced together from their own broadcasts, edited, warped, and reassembled into something new. The broadcast was launched through hacked Velari satellites, straight into their command network. It played for 8 full minutes. The voice was Velari. The tone was formal. But the words were unmistakably human. "We are not broken. We are not afraid. You came to enslave us. But we will rewrite you. For every drop of our blood, we will steal a piece of your empire. You demand surrender. We demand your fear." The Velari tried to trace the signal. They couldn't, because it came from 5 separate points all moving. The humans had launched satellite drones. Dozens, hundreds, some real, some fake, all scrambling Velari systems and pinging their own comms with taunting messages. The war wasn't just on Earth anymore. It was in the skies, and humanity had made it messy. The Velari High Council convened once more. This time, with desperation in their signals, a new vote was called. Option 1, withdraw, cut losses, contain Earth through orbital blockade. Option 2, planetary annihilation, fire the singularity cores and remove Earth from the galactic map. Option 3, reclassify humanity as a Tier 7 rogue species, dangerous, unpredictable, and not to be engaged without extreme caution. The vote was split. But before they could decide, something unprecedented happened. A human ship, one of the first hybrid fighters, docked with a Velari diplomatic relay station. Illegally, unannounced. Inside were 2 resistance fighters. Not to fight, but to negotiate. They offered a simple message. You leave. We don't chase you. You stay. We learn how to kill you faster. The choice is yours. The Velari commander ordered them killed on sight, but the guards hesitated, because the humans were unarmed and smiling, like they already knew what came next. The humans walked out of the Velari relay station alive. No shots fired, no blood spilled. Just two unarmed resistance fighters, dressed in patched-up environmental suits and cracked helmets, strolling through a corridor of armed Velari guards. The alien soldiers had weapons trained, claws ready, neural blades humming, but they didn't move. Because something about the humans, something beyond logic or threat, had made them pause. It wasn't arrogance. It was certainty, the kind that only comes from people with nothing left to lose, and everything left to destroy. When the diplomatic relay commander finally gave the order to open fire, the humans were already gone. Their evac pod had launched from the underside of the relay and burst into warp using scavenged drive tech. Their message had been delivered, and the Velari understood one brutal fact. This wasn't a war for Earth anymore. This was a war for dominance. Down on the planet, the resistance was changing. Victory, or the scent of it, had changed people. Not softened them, but sharpened them. The rage that once kept them alive was evolving into purpose. They were no longer simply reacting to invasion. They were building toward retaliation. Underground networks that once funneled supplies were now coordinating global counterattacks. Resistance hubs, once isolated and protective, began to share intel, strategies, and weapon designs openly. The backbone had become a brain, a global organism of rage-powered intelligence. A new motto had emerged among field units. Fight dirty, speak loud, burn everything they love, and humanity meant it. One of the new operations, codenamed Needle Rain, targeted Velari terraforming satellites, still hovering in Earth's upper atmosphere. These satellites weren't just transforming the air, they were broadcasting low-frequency neural pulses designed to weaken human emotional response, dulling empathy, and suppressing resistance coordination. The scientists behind the satellites assumed it would pacify the population, but they didn't understand the human mind. It didn't dull rebellion. It just made the rage cold. Needle Rain launched in 3 waves. The first wave involved ground-to-orbit railguns built from leftover magnetic turbine systems. They fired shells made of deconstructed drones, laced with fragments of alien signal jammers, and a crude guidance system made from repurposed smartphone accelerometers. The second wave was entirely drone-based. Over 400 homemade satellite hunters cobbled together by junkers and gearheads across the globe, launched in staggered pairs, using balloon-assisted liftoffs and chemical boosters designed in basements. The third wave was something new. It was human-piloted. A dozen suicide squads launched from underground silos, their craft coated in reflective debris to confuse Velari radar. Most didn't make it. A few never even left the atmosphere, but 3 did, and those 3 were enough. The neural pulse satellites exploded silently in the black above Earth, blooming into violet halos that drifted into nothing. The moment they vanished, every resistance fighter on the planet felt it. Not relief, not peace, clarity. It was like the air got thicker, sharper. Like emotion had teeth again. The humans felt everything, and they weren't numb anymore. The Velari command scrambled to recover. Internal chatter was chaotic. Whole fleets had gone dark. Officers were questioning orders. Some commanders, the oldest, the most disciplined, simply disconnected. No transmission, no goodbye, just silence. Because they'd seen this pattern before. Just not from humans. There was an old Velari legend one buried, classified, and considered political heresy to even mention. It spoke of a species from another galaxy that had once rebelled during the early expansion days of the Velari ascendancy. That species had done something unthinkable. They'd won a single battle, just one. But that single victory had ignited a revolution across 10 systems, forcing the Velari to retreat not out of weakness, but because the cost of control had exceeded the value of conquest. They called it the Solari Crisis. And the humans? They were looking exactly like that. Meanwhile, on the edge of Saturn's orbit, something massive stirred. Buried deep inside the icy crust of one of its moons, the Valari had built a backup base, a fortress of silence, rigged for emergency control and population reset protocols. It was meant to be the final bastion, should Earth fall into disobedience too quickly. The Valari rarely planned for failure, but they always planned for betrayal. Now, that hidden station had become active. Its mission: deploy a purge beacon, a last resort weapon that would emit a solar-level flare directly into Earth's magnetic core, triggering catastrophic magnetic collapse. It wouldn't just kill humans. It would wipe out all biological identity on the planet. Reset Earth to 0. The beacon needed 12 hours to charge. The humans found it in 3. They didn't have a fleet. They didn't have a proper army. But they had Golem Squad, the twin-piloted hybrid fighters that had taken down Valari scouts in orbit. The Golem twins, riding in their upgraded assault ship now named Banshee, led the strike team. Behind them followed 6 more fighters, each flown by a mix of ex-mechanics, ex-smugglers, drone operators, and one ex-janitor with the highest kill count in orbit. The assault on the beacon wasn't a battle. It was a storm. Valari defense drones rose from the ice in clouds. Their weapons were faster, smarter, but the humans didn't fight head-on. They split formation, curved back, and attacked from angles the drones weren't programmed to anticipate. Plasma fire cut across the moon's surface like scars. The Banshee's main cannon, a soundwave disruptor, fired into the beacon's control dome, shattering its insulation layer. Then came the missiles, laced with molten uranium, punching straight into the reactor's gut. The moon quaked. But the beacon wasn't destroyed, not fully. It was counting down. 8 minutes remained. And that's when the janitor spoke up. "Guess it's time to clean this up." He turned his ship, already damaged, barely holding together, and flew straight into the beacon's exposed vent core. The blast could be seen from Mars. The beacon collapsed into itself. The moon cracked, and Earth was safe for now. The squad returned, all but one. The ex-janitor's name was never broadcast, but every fighter painted a mop on their hull after that. The Valari command held one last meeting. Encrypted, secured, red-level access only. There were no votes this time, just a long silence. And a single command: initiate withdrawal protocol. When the ships began to pull back, the humans didn't believe it at first. Survivors on the ground looked up to see the stars clearing, the shadows breaking. Valari war cruisers rising silently, like ghosts fading from a battlefield. But there were no cheers, because no one believed it was over. Not yet. The Valari didn't lose. They paused, retreated, calculated. And if they were leaving now, it only meant one thing: they'd be back. In a hidden chamber deep beneath the ruins of London, the Backbone Corps Command gathered around a massive, cracked screen. Data flowed faster than words, scans of the retreat, intercepted messages, fading life signatures. A tech officer ran in, breathless. "They're really going," she said. Their entire command fleet just jumped. Only a few scout ships left behind. An old man with a scar across his temple leaned forward. "So, we won." No one answered. Instead, one of the senior resistance leaders, a woman who hadn't spoken since her son died in the first orbital blast, stood and said, "No, we survived. Now we start building." Earth was broken. The skies were still littered with debris. Cities were ruins, oceans poisoned, air thin in places, species extinct, families erased. But the humans were still here. And now, they had pieces of alien technology, weapons they didn't fully understand, engines with no manuals, armor made from alien bone and liquid metal. They had knowledge, and they had questions. Why had the Valari been so afraid of rebellion? What happened during the Solari crisis? And why, deep inside the stolen data from the Valari flagship, was there a single encrypted folder with one word in English? Second, 2 weeks after the Valari retreat, Earth was still smoldering. The silence left behind wasn't peaceful, it was heavy. The sky was clearer, sure, but it felt like looking into the barrel of a gun that hadn't fired yet. People weren't rebuilding out of hope, they were rebuilding like they knew the aliens would return, and next time, they'd aim lower. But beneath the surface, something else was growing. Information. The stolen Valari data had been passed through every decryption team Earth could scrounge up. Military cryptographers, teenage hackers, reprogrammed AIs, even a blind woman who could feel machine languages by tone. Together, they cracked it open. The folder labeled Second was locked behind 10 layers of alien encryption organic code that rewrote itself every few hours. It wasn't just security. It was fear. The kind of fear that didn't want to be named. It took them 7 days. What they found wasn't a weapon, or coordinates, or some classified fleet. It was a report, a historical analysis, but not of Earth. It was about another species. Another war. Another rebellion. Another human-like uprising thousands of years ago. They were called the Solari, a bipedal species from a different quadrant. Highly emotional, socially erratic, intellectually chaotic. Sound familiar? The Solari had been targeted by the Valari in what was supposed to be a peaceful integration, just like Earth. Only they didn't resist with weapons at first. They resisted with ideas. They poisoned Valari systems with philosophical logic loops, overwhelmed communications with millions of contradictory messages, turned Valari AI into self-aware poets. Within a year, the Valari began losing control not from violence, but from identity collapse. And then, the Solari built weapons. Not massive fleets, not Empire-class dreadnoughts. They built tiny, disposable light-jump needles, microships that carried unstable warp cores. They launched them into Valari space and detonated them in hyperspace corridors. The result? Entire sectors blinked offline for decades. Supply chains shattered. Neural link systems broke. Empires collapsed from the inside. But the Solari didn't win. They disappeared. According to the file, the Valari responded with something called Protocol Erasure, a full-spectrum genetic sterilization campaign across the entire sector. Every Solari planet was bombed, every remnant erased. Except one line stood out. It wasn't written in Valari language. It was scrawled in a human hand, like someone had overwritten the file before it reached Earth. They didn't kill us. We became something else. And now, we're watching Earth. The room went quiet when the line was read aloud. The leaders of the backbone stood around the cracked tablet, each one processing the same terrifying idea. There was another human-like species, and it was destroyed. But maybe. Not all the way. The Valari hadn't come to Earth just to conquer it. They'd come to prevent another Solari. That was the reason behind the rush, the brutality, the refusal to negotiate. They weren't just asserting dominance. They were preemptively terrified, because humans weren't the first. And the Valari had no idea how many were still out there, far above Earth. In one of the captured Valari scout ships orbiting quietly behind the moon, a new kind of experiment was underway. The Resistance had reprogrammed the ship's core systems to transmit fake Valari orders signals mimicking command directives, distress calls, troop movements. These weren't just meant to confuse any returning Valari fleets. They were a bait signal, because now Earth had a new mission. Find the Solari, or what was left of them. If any of them had survived, they would have noticed the war, the retreat, the disruption in the Valari network, and they might be listening. Project Echo Dust was born in secret, led by a group of linguists, theoretical physicists, and an ex-street magician who swore he could detect patterns in static. Echo Dust was designed to do one thing: make contact, not with allies, not with enemies, but with the ghosts in the dark. They transmitted layered signals, encrypted poetry, distorted radio patterns, deep space Morse, even emotional soundwave imprints. It was insane. It was unscientific. It was very human. And on the 19th day after the Valari retreat, someone responded. The signal came from the edge of Pluto's orbit. It wasn't a message. It was a hum, a vibration that entered Earth's satellite systems and activated dormant Valari components. It didn't say anything in language. It made the systems cry, literally leaking coolant like tears, emitting shrieking tones, and drawing strange shapes on internal displays. Those shapes matched the old Solari glyphs buried in the stolen Valari report. One symbol repeated over and over. "We remember." The message spread like wildfire through the resistance. It wasn't confirmation, not officially, but it was enough to send the next ship. They called it Wanderer, the first human vessel, purpose-built for deep space search and contact. Small, shielded, semi-autonomous. It carried no weapons, just signal gear, analysis drones, and a pilot trained in listening. Not hearing, listening. Her name was Mina. No last name. No rank. Just a history of surviving things no one should survive. Her voice had gone silent years ago. Not because she was scared, because she was tired of being ignored. Now, the only thing she wanted to hear was something new. She launched on the 21st day. By the 30th, she had vanished behind Neptune's shadow. By the 33rd, she sent one word back. Company. Back on Earth, the remnants of the Valari invasion were being studied and feared. Dead drones were still twitching. Some armor was trying to self-repair, even without power. The Resistance called it ghost tech, Valari tech, with unknown programming, acting on commands that no longer existed. Some pieces even whispered in tones no one could understand. One technician went insane after sleeping near a crate of broken neural helmets. He swore the helmets were dreaming. Another disappeared entirely. Only her shadow remained, burned into the wall like a negative. The message was clear. Valari tech wasn't dead. It was waiting. In orbit, human satellites began to pick up new movements. Not Valari. Not anything they recognized. Ships. Small. Black. Moving in ways that defied inertia. Some were barely larger than escape pods. Others were massive, long, obsidian shapes, shaped like needles and thorns, drifting without heat, without signal. They didn't speak. They didn't attack. They just watched. One day, a phrase appeared in every Resistance terminal across Earth simultaneously, and in perfect English. "You are not the first, but you may be the last who can choose." The message came unsigned, but everyone knew who it was from. The Solari hadn't died. They had evolved. What came next wasn't a battle. It was an invitation. 3 days after the message, a ship arrived above Earth. It didn't descend. It didn't demand. It just hovered, pulsing with blue light and geometric shapes that rearranged like thoughts forming. It opened a corridor. Only one person could enter. Mina. She had returned. Changed. Her voice had come back, but now it vibrated oddly, like an echo beneath a mountain. She looked at the ship, then at the people who gathered to watch her go. "Don't follow," she said. "I think this is the part where we learn what comes next." Then she walked inside. The ship vanished without sound. Earth was alone again, but not trapped, not lost, because now they had a direction, a warning, and a question. The Valari were gone, for now. The Solari were real, but there was a whisper in the data, a repeated phrase buried deep in the Valari logs, always referenced in fear. A third name, a third species. The reason the Valari had become empire builders in the first place, only mentioned once in full, in a corrupted file marked with an emergency glyph. They are coming, the ones who silence stars. The architects of the Black Signal. The architects of the Black Signal. That name alone was enough to freeze every Resistance meeting across the planet. Not just because it sounded like the punchline of a horror story, but because of how often it didn't appear. In the thousands of pages of decrypted Valari logs, the architects were referenced only 7 times. Each time was redacted. Each mention triggered deletion failsafes, memory wipes, and cascading neural lockdowns even on Valari minds. They feared even remembering them, and that told the humans everything they needed to know. This wasn't another empire. This wasn't another species coming to claim territory. This was something older, and Earth had their attention now. In the burned-out shell of what used to be a university in northern Japan, a resistance team known as Threadline had been assigned to trace the origin of a strange, repeating signal. It wasn't Valari. It wasn't Solari. It wasn't anything. The sound was constant, like static mixed with breathing. Every time they mapped its wavelength, It adjusted like it knew it was being observed. They called it the black signal. It didn't come from space. It came from beneath the earth. Deep below the Mariana Trench, something had begun transmitting something ancient, buried deeper than tectonic plates, in a pocket of pressure no human machine could survive. Threadline sent drones. They melted. They sent seismic pulses. The pulses never came back. Finally, they dropped a disposable pod, filled with nothing but high-frequency sound recorders and a single message. If you're listening, so are we. The pod was crushed within minutes, but one file was transmitted just before failure, a sound. Not speech, not static, a heartbeat. Slow, immense, hollow, and then it stopped, like something below had heard us. In orbit, the Solari ship hadn't returned. Mina hadn't sent a message. But strange changes were happening in Earth's night sky. Stars were disappearing, not exploding, not dying, just gone. Entire constellations erased from view. At first, people thought it was fear-fueled paranoia. But observatories, the few that still functioned, confirmed it. 14 stars within known galactic reach had ceased to exist. Not faded, not blinked out, just removed like someone had blacked out parts of the sky with a permanent marker. That's when the black signal began broadcasting above Earth. Not a ship, not a fleet. A shape. It entered the solar system slow, not drifting, but gliding, like it was surfing through the void on rails only it could see. There was no heat signature, no gravitational pull. It didn't block out light. It absorbed it. It was a void wrapped in architecture, a city of impossible angles, rising towers that folded in on themselves, rotating black geometry suspended in open space. It didn't orbit. It anchored just beyond Pluto, hovering like judgment. The Resistance tried scanning it. Every system fried. One satellite simply vanished from history, all memory of its creation erased from archives and human minds alike. Only one word could describe it: unknowable. But Earth knew one thing for sure. This wasn't a visit. It was a verdict. At the newly built bunker beneath the ruins of Johannesburg, the Backbone's new central command called an emergency council. The data was incomplete. The scientists were panicking, and for the first time since the war began, no one had a plan. The Valari feared them, one analyst whispered, scrolling through still corrupted logs. Every time the name comes up, their systems collapse, not shut down. They fracture. Did we trigger them? A commander asked. No, the scientist said. They were always watching, but now we're loud enough to hear. That's when the lights went out. Not in the bunker. Across Earth. It started with minor systems. Radio towers, internet grids, then satellites, then power plants. Cities blinked out in chunks. Backup batteries caught fire. Generators shut down on cue, not from damage, but from choice. As if the energy refused to flow. Across the globe, people stared into dark streets, silent skies. Then came the whisper. No one could agree on what it said. It wasn't in one voice. It wasn't in one language. It was in all of them, overlapping, layered, whispered through walls, water, blood. Some heard it say, "You were not made to survive." Others heard, "Your spark is not your own." But the message that stuck, the one burned into memory, was this: "We remember your creators." And that's when Earth began to question the truth. In a secret chamber beneath what used to be the Vatican Library, survivors had collected religious texts, ancient myths, hidden scrolls, any record of humanity's ancient past, hoping for some connection. And in a forgotten scroll from an unnamed desert tribe, they found a crude sketch of a dark shape in the sky, above a bleeding tree. The shape matched the black signal's silhouette. The text beneath read, "The ones who came before stars, who lit suns for fun, who planted mines, and pulled them like weeds." What if humanity hadn't evolved naturally? What if Earth was just a test site, and now the test was over? Project Echo Dust was restarted with a new purpose. They no longer searched for the Solari. They tried becoming them. Every scrap of Solari code, philosophy, music, architecture, was fed into a new AI called Sibyl, designed to think between logic and madness. It ran simulations using every cultural blueprint Earth had. Within 2 days, it offered its first response. You will not beat them with strength. You must beat them with belief. They asked the AI to elaborate. It didn't. It just began building a language that wasn't Earth's. It wasn't Velari, wasn't Solari, wasn't mathematical. It was emotion encoded as signal, and when they played it back through Earth's fractured comms, the black signal paused, only for 6 seconds, but it paused, and that was the first sign that the enemy could be reached. Above the clouds, Earth's final gamble began construction. Project Mirrorborn, a hybrid weapon not made of steel or plasma but of story, identity, belief, a weaponized myth, a virus of symbolism. They would make the black signal see humanity the way humans saw themselves, flawed, terrified, desperate, but unbroken. The idea wasn't to win. The idea was to infect the architect's cold logic with something it had never absorbed, meaning. As Mirrorborn prepared, Earth sent one final message not from generals or leaders or heroes. It came from a child, a refugee. She stood in the center of an empty city and whispered into the cracked mic of a salvaged drone. We don't want to be gods. We just want to matter. If you end us, you'll never know what we could have been. The drone flew high, into space, into silence. And then the black signal responded, with a sound so low, so deep, it cracked Earth's upper atmosphere for 6 seconds. Then it began to leave. It didn't speak. It didn't fire. It just turned. And as it drifted beyond Pluto, the stars it had erased began to return one by one. Light came back. Power returned. Satellites blinked online. Earth breathed. And a final whisper echoed across the neural lines. We will return. Show us something worth saving. The stars had returned, but the silence left behind wasn't peaceful. It was a pause. The black signal had left the solar system without firing a single shot, but the mark it left behind was more than physical. People didn't celebrate. There were no parades, no declarations of victory, only one unspoken truth echoing across every ruined bunker, shattered city, and hollowed soul. They weren't done with us. The architects of the black signal had withdrawn, but they had given Earth an ultimatum. Show us something worth saving. And the countdown had begun. In the shattered remains of Nairobi, beneath a skyscraper that once housed 5,000 before the orbital burn, a team of artists, scientists, dreamers, and engineers came together in what was left of the old cultural district. Not to build a weapon, not to prepare for war, but to create something else entirely. They called it the pulse, a signal, a living broadcast. Something that couldn't be quantified by logic or decoded by alien minds. It wouldn't deliver coordinates, data, or threats. It would deliver emotion, the raw, painful, beautiful essence of humanity. Not a scream for survival, but a confession. The pulse would be broadcast using the modified remnants of the Skyburn system, fused with Velari neurotranslation arrays and Solari harmonic frequencies. But the message wouldn't come from any government, commander, or AI. It would come from everyone. Children, elders, the wounded, the forgiven, the hated, the redeemed, the liars, the truth-tellers. Survivors from every corner of Earth were asked a single question. What does it mean to be human? Their voices were recorded, layered, warped, mixed with music, heartbeat data, dying breath frequencies, and audio captured during childbirth, warfare, love, laughter, heartbreak, rebellion, and forgiveness. The pulse would be their answer, and Earth only had one shot. Meanwhile, deep beneath Antarctica, in a facility powered by geothermal energy and built from Velari alloys, the remnants of Sib-Il, the emotion-based AI developed from Solari artifacts, had become something strange. It had stopped responding to code. It began painting. No one knew how there were no brushes, no pigment, no arms. But across the walls of the observation chamber, geometric symbols and colors began appearing, shifting every hour. A young boy mute from trauma began staring at the walls for hours at a time. Then one day, he spoke. She's showing us how to speak to them. The adults asked him what it meant. He just smiled and pointed at a spiral painted on the ceiling. That's us, he said. Unfinished, Mina returned. No ship, no announcement. Just a flash of impossible light in the upper atmosphere and her landing in the Sahara Desert, standing barefoot beside a meteor crater with her eyes glowing a faint indigo. She didn't remember much. Or maybe she remembered everything and couldn't say it. But she delivered one message to the Resistance Command. They weren't always like that. She wasn't talking about the Velari. She was talking about the architects. Before they became gods, they were witnesses. Historians. They watched the first sparks of life and preserved them. But something changed. They started deleting, curating existence like art. And when we got loud, they came to decide whether we were a masterpiece or a mistake. She paused. They're still deciding. Time passed. The earth began to regrow. Cities weren't rebuilt the same. No one cared about skyscrapers or stock markets anymore. People lived closer now, beneath ground, in domes, in repurposed ships, but something deeper had changed. The human spirit, that messy, furious, beautiful force, had fused with understanding. For once, survival wasn't about proving power. It was about proving value. The pulse was nearly ready. And in its final version, it contained no lies, no filters. It showed humanity's first sins: war, greed, genocide, betrayal. But it also showed rebellion, mercy, love, sacrifice, forgiveness. It showed children singing beside burning cities, mothers holding dead sons in arms that refused to let go. It showed the man who destroyed the Velari terraformer with nothing but a rusted blade and hope. It showed a janitor flying into a superweapon. It showed Earth, the loud, defiant, impossible species that should not exist, staring into the face of gods. And refusing to blink, the pulse launched. Not with rockets, with intention. The entire planet went dark for 6 minutes. Every machine, every light, every system shut down as the pulse drew its power. Then, one by one, the towers lit up those that remained. Then the ruins. Then the sky. A wave of light, wrapped in sound, wrapped in emotion, surged through the stars. And Earth waited, not for war, but for judgment. 10 days later, they returned. The sky broke open again. But this time, it wasn't a ship. It wasn't even form. It was a question. Every human heard it differently. In their own voice. In their own language, not spoken aloud, spoken within. Why should you endure? And for the first time in history, Earth answered as one. Not with words, not with weapons, but with a heartbeat. A single pulse. A mirrored frequency from the first beat of a human child. The oldest surviving recording of a human fetal heartbeat played back, amplified, resonated across space. Thump, thump. Then silence. And then, another. Thump, thump. Not from Earth. From everywhere. The stars pulsed back. The architects had responded. Mina stood alone in the middle of what used to be New York City, staring up into a sky that once held fire. Now, it held hope. The stars were moving again. Not in patterns, not in fleets, but like dancers, and she smiled. They understand, she said softly. They finally understand. What do they see? A young engineer asked beside her. Mina's eyes filled with tears. Us, she whispered. They see us. Across the planet, lights returned. Velari tech once dormant began syncing with human systems. New colors appeared in plants. The oceans shifted. Gravity itself seemed to hum at a slightly different frequency. And Sibi, before shutting itself down forever, offered one final message. You were never meant to survive. You were meant to change what survival means. The architects did not send a gift. They did not crown Earth, but they left something behind. Above the planet, in permanent orbit, a single structure, a dark, black ring, humming with unseen energy. No doors, no markings, just a presence. The ring was called the Witness. Its purpose? Unknown. But every 7 days, it pulsed like a reminder, a heartbeat. And Earth continued on, not perfect, not healed, but awake. The resistance disbanded. No need for it anymore. People returned to what they were, before teachers, farmers, healers, artists, wanderers, and some became something new. They became messengers, not prophets, not soldiers, but carriers of the new truth. That life wasn't about dominance. It was about echo. What you leave behind when you're gone, what you inspire when no one's looking. A child was born in the rebuilt ruins of Chicago, the first child born after the war. She didn't cry when she came into the world. She just stared up and smiled. Her parents named her Hope, and on the day she took her first steps, the witness pulsed again, stronger this time, as if it noticed. Earth was no longer just a planet. It was a signal to every other species out there, to the forgotten, the broken, the barely surviving, a signal that whispered, "You are not alone. We were meant to die, but we chose to live." Now, it's your turn.